A friend of mine told me of this free game on Steam, which is supposed to be really scary. As a fan of scary games, I decided to give it a fair chance after checking out the trailer. And yes, the graphics look really dated, but that's something I can handle if the game itself is good. So I ended up downloading Cry of Fear and wanted to set it up in order to be able to play it in ultra wide. Since this game uses the engine of Half-Life 1, I figured that this should be possible without too much of a hassle. After all, Half-Life 1 itself works in ultra wide and you can set it up in various ways, especially if you consider that I think one of the latest updates of the game actually features these resolutions natively, so you don't even need specific fixes. Well, it would seem that for one reason or another, the developers of Cry of Fear decided to remove all of these options. I tried for 2 hours and nothing worked, none of the fixes. I don't know what they did, but they modified the game in such a way that nothing seems to be able to force any higher resolutions than 1080p normal. Playing the game, which was developed on a Half-Life 1 engine in 2021, is not without its problems. I did mention the ultra-wide situation, but on the other end, the other problems are actually more serious. For one, the controls feel really weird and unresponsive. Everything is somehow clunky. You have to really try to understand what I mean. You even have to do crouch jumps. I know that you must be thinking, what the hell is a crouch jump? Well, in Half-Life 1, you used to have these small spaces, such as vents for example, where you would not fit unless you would jump and hold the crouch button while mid-air. The idea behind it is that you make your character model small while mid-air so that you can squeeze into these smaller spaces. But we will use it for all kinds of places that for one reason or another were buggy and wouldn't let the player fit otherwise. So this was something that was actually made intentionally into this engine. It isn't something that we just exploited or something like that. No, it is part of the engine. It is part of how the game was supposed to be played. And since this one uses that specific engine, it also uses crouch jumping quite a lot. Unfortunately, this technique is also used when jumping long distances and is therefore necessary during the game's many platforming sections. And take a closer look at this particular footage. I am going through a crack in the wall while standing upright, and it seems to work without any issues. But if I want to go in through the other side of the same crack, I can't. It's like the model just doesn't fit, so I have to crouch jump in order to be able to cross in there, or at least crouch, depending on where it's happening. In this particular footage, crouching was sufficient. But the point is, the game is so weirdly clunky that even such minor obvious things don't work properly. And no, this is not by design. You actually have to backtrack in this particular instance in this clip, so it's not like they made it so that you cannot go back as a sign of guiding the player. No, this is not the case. Another weird thing that surprised me was that you can't sprint up a flight of stairs. Our protagonist seems to do this weird thing where he behaves as though he just ran into a wall. It's very strange. It's like he hits his face into an invisible wall. You can't climb the stairs normally if you just walk, but if you try to sprint, this counts both going up or down. Our character will just slam his face into an invisible wall and that's it. And just another example of how clunky everything is. The game also has a section where it bugged out for me once I used the telescope. You are supposed to use it in order to progress the story, but for some strange reason, my character was stuck leaning sideways after doing it. I actually tested this and it happened consistently every time I reloaded the game and used it again, so it isn't something that happens just once or that I was unlucky. No, it just always happens. Fortunately, a short loading screen, which occurs when transitioning into another section of the map, seems to fix this, but it was still quite weird. It's not game breaking in the sense that you don't have to fight anyone in there, you just, turn around, go through a door more or less and you're fixed, but it is a weird thing to have. The game doesn't teach you how to play properly either. It would seem that it assumes that a player knows how these things work, or at least used to work in Half-Life 1, but many of its functions just are never explained. One major thing I found out was that you can actually aim down the sights of the weapons. Unfortunately, I realized it only by chance and only at the end of the game, so I played the game using hipfire throughout most of it. I can't even tell you if that has too much of an effect when it comes to accuracy. It's hard to judge, but it would have been good to know this from the start. The game just never did. And the way you do it is not intuitive whatsoever. You have to press in the mouse scroller. Who does that? The only excuse for that is that the game was released nearly 10 years ago, so back then it wasn't that far from the original Half-Life, and I'm going to just assume that that's how it was there. I really don't remember, but if it was like that, I guess the players back then knew better than I do today. Before I dig deeper into the game's other issues, let's talk a bit about its story and presentation. Obviously, I'm not going to spoil anything here, so no need to worry. We play as Simon, a young man who lives in a city which could either be Swedish or somewhere where the native language is English. I say this because you will see some things clearly be written in Swedish, such as newspaper articles and billboards, but then the street names and other writings will all be English and have generally English names. The devs are from Sweden, so I assumed that they wanted to make the game take place there, but as stated, that definitely isn't a clear-cut case here. The roads all have names that end with road, way, alley and lane, and while many of them do have some kind of relation to Nordic tribes and their mythology and stuff, there are many of them which have very English sounding names, so I'm a bit confused. I mean, in any case, the game is going to happen in some kind of a fictional city, so that's not a big deal, but I found it strange that they couldn't make up their mind. With that being said, as soon as Simon starts the game, you will get a strong Silent Hill vibe. And I'm talking the first two Silent Hill games, so the really good stuff. The game absolutely nails the feeling of being lost in more ways than one. The thing that impressed me was how both the visuals and all of its sounds gave you that feeling of impending doom. Bad stuff is about to happen to Simon, and all you can do is help guide him towards it. There's no other option. The game starts off slowly. Simon only has a switchblade to defend himself, and there are monsters lurking about. The game fails to teach us about Simon's ability to quickly evade by tapping a directional button twice, yet another thing that I found by pure chance, although it felt just as clunky and unresponsive as everything else, so I didn't feel like I lost that much. Luckily, I was playing the game on the easy difficulty, so that kind of balanced out off the hits I took due to the game's poor controls and lack of explanation. But if someone decided to go and play this game in hard, this is something that they should definitely know, so I would recommend that you definitely start the game on easy the first time around. Otherwise, you're gonna get frustrated because the game just doesn't teach you enough about its world the first time around. The story is quite unclear at first. We have to get through the city and go home, but clearly there is no easy way to achieve that, especially because the city is now infested with monsters. The game uses a dual wield and inventory system. The dual wielding is designed surprisingly well considering how everything else works. It allows us to either carry two small firearms simultaneously or a combination of a weapon and another useful item such as our mobile phone, which serves as a source of light. And trust me, you will need it. The game is dark for the most part, but that works to its benefit since the ugly graphics are much easier to accept when you can't see them that well. As for the inventory system, it's something that reminds me of other survival horror games. You only have a few slots, and if you find something you need or might like, you have to drop something else in order to replace it. This isn't that big of a deal when you're replacing your weapons with new ones, and those won't be that often anyway, but I get annoyed when the game presents you with a quest item such as some sort of a key or a fuse, and sometimes those can be more than one at once. The problem with that is that these require you to drop something else in order to carry them, just like you would with a new weapon, for example. However, unlike other games, Cry of Fear leaves the dropped weapons on the floor, where you could pick them up again if you wanted to. Now, why would I be annoyed with this, you would wonder? It sounds like a win-win, you can come back and pick it up once you've used the item. Well, it's because it means that I will have a reason to backtrack unnecessarily, and this happens more often than you think. It's a clear way to pad the game time. I'd rather there was a special pouch for quest items only, or if that is too much to ask for, have the dropped item disappear so that the player doesn't have the choice to return for them. I know this sounds crazy, but in a survival horror game, you have to ration everything and hoard items as much as you can. People will say, just don't go back and don't backtrack if you don't want to. But those people don't seem to understand the mindset of the player who is now playing a survival horror. This is not an option. You will return for it, always. It's just the illusion of a choice, but it's a lie. If you want to win at these games, you will go back and pick up these guns or whatever else you threw away. There's no other option, you have to do it. And if the game doesn't leave me that choice, at least I won't have to backtrack. If it does, I always will, and so will everyone else, because we're not stupid after all. We need these supplies. With the inventory out of the way, it's time we spoke about the game's stamina system. The stamina sucks. It recovers really slowly and will kill you both when fighting monsters and when doing platforming. The latter is my main issue. In a game where the controls are weirdly unresponsive and clunky, the devs decided to actually add a stamina bar so that you are forced to take long breaks between jumps during a platforming section. You know, cause why not? If you don't want to wait for your stamina to recover, just jump. You'll make a shorter jump and fall to your death, but hey, you didn't have to wait, right? Oh yeah, now you have to wait for your game to load, because your game, by the way, only can be saved at specific times. It's a bit like the Resident Evil system where you need typewriters, only here it's cassette recorders. The point is, you gotta wait for your stamina. Additionally, the stamina makes sure that you can sprint while backtracking to get your dropped items that I mentioned earlier, for example, or while backtracking since the story actually demands it. Yes, you backtrack a lot in this game, and the stamina makes sure you don't do it too quickly. We don't want the player to be too comfortable, right? They need to spend as much time possible playing this game. I don't know if you have noticed this, but I have slowly transitioned from unintended negatives to such that appear to be intentionally placed into the game by the developers. While the aforementioned limitations mainly serve to slow down the player and are a form of padding for the game's playthrough duration, there are a few of those that actually make sense in such a game and serve to add both the tension that is needed to scare the player as well as a pinch of realism in Cry of Fear. The first of those is that reloading your weapons in this game is complicated. If you hold a handgun in one hand and your phone in another so that you can illuminate the room, you will realize that you cannot reload the gun once the magazine is empty, because you need two hands to change a magazine and one of them is literally holding a phone, so you can't do it. I found that out the hard way and died because of it. I'm not blaming the game this time. I think this is okay because it happens fairly early in the game. You will have to reload and you'll figure this out. Unlike games like Resident Evil, here going to the inventory menu does not pause the action and you can't simply reload your gun from there either. You have to switch to two-handed mode in order to do that. Only then can you actually reload the gun. But of course you're doing it in the dark and you have the option to either fire where you can see pretty much anything or very little, or you can switch to one-handed mode again while you're dual wielding the phone, but you have to consider the enemy isn't politely waiting for all this to happen, so the game actually offers you the option to plan ahead, perhaps reload the gun earlier so that you're ready and waiting with a full magazine for the next enemy to appear. But there's another thing to consider in this game when it comes to reloading, and it's yet another point of view that is realistic. If you reload your magazine, all bullets that were left in the previous one are discarded. I think that this is a good idea here, but also seems like a bit of a wasted possibility. If you want to be more realistic, make it possible for the player to perhaps grab that magazine off the floor after the fight, extract the bullets and add them to the new magazine. That's something a real person would do, but I might be asking too much. Speaking of the fights, Simon will face many different kinds of monsters, and they are truly weird and unpleasant to look at. This is where another problem becomes clearly visible, however. The monsters give very little feedback when being hit. They don't seem affected by the bullets you fire. In addition, they tend to have relatively long death animations as well. This can cause you to waste some shots by shooting an enemy more times than was intended for it to die, simply because you couldn't tell if all of the shots connected, or because you didn't realize that the enemy has entered its death animation, which just takes too long. You know, the enemy starts shaking, screaming. Yeah, once you've killed an enemy like 20 times, you're gonna get a much better feeling for it, but the point is that at first you're gonna be wasting ammo on it. And this is probably a design choice, but it isn't my favorite one by far. There's another thing I don't appreciate in horror games, and that's jump scares. I consider such tricks to be cheap and lame. If you think of the first two Silent Hill games, you had next to no real jump scares. They would more often than not play a bunch of weird noises or even screams, but those would not be followed by any monsters. The game kept you on edge the whole time. You heard something somewhere in the distance. You weren't sure what it was, but it was not a jump scare in the classical sense. In Cry of Fear, you're taught early on to expect enemies in the most cliché ways possible. Oh, a door to a dark room has opened. Yep, an enemy is hiding in there and waiting for me to come closer so that it can scream in my face and try to kill me. What's that? There's a dark corner over there at the end of this tunnel? Yep, an enemy is hiding there and will try to scare you by screaming its balls off. That's how it goes in this game. The thing is, jump scares work on people who are inexperienced with horror games, but such people usually don't like horror games to begin with. So the likelihood of them playing Cry of Fear is super low because that's not even a popular one. It's definitely not the kind of game that a person who doesn't like horror games or who hasn't played lots of horror games will suddenly start playing for the first time. That I just don't see that happening. I mean, I didn't even know of its existence, and you, dear viewer, you probably don't know of it either. It's part of the reason why I'm introducing you to it. On the other hand, people such as myself are very likely to be the target audience. If you want to scare a seasoned player, you have to dig much deeper in the box of tricks. Jump scares will almost never work, and when they do, they annoy the player more than anything else. It's lazy and unimaginative. This is why Silent Hill is still considered to be the king of survival horror. They create this tension in their games. You hear noises, sometimes louder, sometimes closer. It feels as though something's about to happen, something really bad, but it almost never does. The more the player waits for something terrible to happen, the more anxious they become. Still, credit where it's due, the monsters are designed in an interesting way. Besides looking really messed up, some of them also attack in very original ways to begin with. For example, there are these female ghosts which will cause Simon to succumb to suicidal thoughts and straight out shoot himself in the head if you don't pass. Well, I'd call it a quick time event. You're just mashing the button. Yeah, it's kind of a quick time event before they even really were popular back in the day. But the thing is, it's designed very well. You start breathing really heavily, you panic, you start lifting the gun to your head, and then you shoot it if you don't react fast enough. And I didn't the first time around. I shot myself and it was really cool. So the second time I thought, I'm gonna kill her. There's gotta be a way to kill that ghost. So I started shooting the ghost. And the ghost pretty much did the same thing to me. So I realized, okay, but can you force me to kill myself if I'm not holding the gun? So I'm just holding a knife now. I'm thinking, if it makes me slit my own throat, that'd be pretty cool. It's worth seeing. But no, the ghost couldn't do that, obviously. But the ghost has another trick up its sleeve. A fetus will burst through the woman's stomach, wielding a kitchen knife, and it will try to stab you to death. And that's as sick and twisted as it is original, and I really like it. It's just cool, you know. It made me think in a different direction, and then the game was like, well, we're prepared for this. Here's what we got. And guess what the weakness of the ghost is? Where you gotta hit it or shoot it in that moment in order to dispatch it. That's right, in the fucking fetus. You know, if this video was ever monetized, this is the point where we'll get demonetized, I'm sure. Well, in any case, what I did not like, however, were the many cheap deaths I had to suffer. The game will place certain gotcha scripts in the player's way, which are nearly impossible to avoid the first time you encounter them. For example, in some sections, we will suddenly be chased down by a guy with a chainsaw. The enemy will kill us in one hit if he catches us. Running is simply not enough here, since the path where we need to run diverges into multiple dead ends, and it's a clear trial and error thing, because as soon as you turn the wrong way, you get, you know, chopped into with a chainsaw. A similar thing happens in the subway tunnels, where a train will suddenly appear and run you over. The game actually does this multiple times throughout the whole campaign, and it always felt cheap and lame. The boss encounters in the game often include some sort of gimmick if you want to defeat them. I actually liked that, although the solution will often not become obvious the first time around, and you will have to die before you can understand. In this clip, you can see, for example, how this goes. I'm trying to spin some valves in this tiny room with a boss who will kill me in a single hit. I'm not sure what these valves do, but clearly shooting the boss himself does nothing, so I'm trying with that. There are these valves I can spin, you know, I can turn them, so obviously that's what I gotta do. The problem here is that the first time around, when I did it, I didn't realize that the water on which I'm standing is gonna get electrocuted. I kind of didn't pay attention, and the boss killed me good. Well, actually, it didn't kill me. The boss didn't kill me. The electricity killed me and the boss at the same time. What's funny is that although I am dead, the game recognizes that the boss has died as well and runs the script where Simon, our protagonist, walks up to him and does some weird stuff to him. Unfortunately, I still had to replay the fight, even though the whole cutscene played out and it looked as though I had won. I was dead, and the game would not let me play, so, you know, I had to replay. It's not a big deal, but it was a curious thing that Simon is dead and watching himself do some stuff to the corpse. But this would not be a survival horror game if it didn't feature any puzzles. There are very few of them, and all of them are super easy, with the exception of one called the park puzzle. You have to read a poem there and move a bunch of statues in a very specific way. Doesn't sound so hard, but the problem with this puzzle is something that we've seen in other places where there's some kind of riddle or something. It's all described way too vaguely and doesn't make that much sense. This seems to be something the community has agreed upon upon, and luckily there are lots of solutions online you can watch and immediately solve the puzzle more or less. I still gave it a shot for 15 minutes before I was like, absolutely not, and just went and looked at a video on YouTube. My biggest problem with the game is how it doesn't do a good enough job at restricting the player in some of its instances. It should guide the player in the right direction sometimes, because there is the danger of getting lost, and that's what happened to me. Allow me to explain. There was a section where we enter the subway station and are told to chase a guy. Unfortunately, you can go in one of two directions and the game does not restrict you in any way from going down the wrong path. Now there's a cutscene and you see the guy walk in a place, but everything looks very similar, in part because of the poor graphics and also because you're literally on a subway station. And if you've ever been in a subway station, you know that it looks on the left side of the subway station looks almost identical to the right side. You know, there's some stairs that go upstairs and that's pretty much it. And we just see him turn left to the stairs, but we are kind of in the middle and it's kind of dependent where you look at it. Now, frankly, it was probably my fault. If I had paid more attention, I would have realized where to go, but I just went with whatever my camera was pointing at. I just assumed that my character will be aligned with it and went in the wrong direction, which then the game allowed. And not only did it allow that, it allowed me to go really far away from that spot. So at some point I realized I'm kind of stuck. There's nothing to do here. Like, I did everything, I killed all the monsters, I picked some stuff up. It does not look like there's a solution. And then I spent the next 2 hours going back and forth, 2 hours in order to find a way. And then I realized, hey, there was this thing back then. Let's try to go all the way back there and see what's up. And I found it. Now let's assume I'm an idiot and most people won't have this problem. Let's assume this is a very obvious thing and only the stupidest of players would have this issue. They still have to account for that. That's the truth of it. Because if I had not been so dedicated to playing this game, I would have stopped then and there. And this is just a stupid reason to stop. All they had to do was place a locked door in the wrong way where I would need a key, and all I had to do to get that key is go to the right way so that I can't deviate. I would go there, grab the key, unlock that wrong door, and then I can pass there and do whatever it takes instead of going the wrong way and just getting lost for a very long time. They could have fixed this and they could have done it a different way as well. At one point, if you try to go back, the game will play a message saying Simon doesn't want to go back there, there's nothing left for him there. Well, they could have done the same thing with that particular door where you go to the wrong door, you try to open it and the game says Simon should chase the guy who went the other way and just doesn't let you go in that direction. That would have been perfect. Well, they didn't. It cost me 2 hours. It's probably mostly my fault, but again, they should account for these things. The last issue I want to address here are the voices of the characters during cutscenes. It seems like the background music is really loud and the voice is really quiet. Just listen to this clip.
Sophie? What the hell are you doing here?
Oh, hi, Simon.
What? I don't understand anything now.
What is it that you don't understand?
What do you think? The whole fucking city is crawling with monsters and suddenly you just turn up on these rooftops? What are you doing here? Are you hurt?
Monsters? Simon, you're scaring me.
Scaring? What the fuck? This is just sick. Well, maybe it's just...
Let's talk about something else. How have you been?
I know from experience how hard it can be to nail down the volume of things, but here it seems to be off by quite a bit. The voice acting is fine, especially when you consider that this is a free game made by an independent small developer, but the volumes could have been made much better. Luckily the game has subtitles, otherwise I bet some people, me included, would not be able to understand half of what is being said because it's so quiet, and you don't want to make the game too loud because then everything else is too loud. Now it's time to talk about all that Cry of Fear does well. I spent most of this review shitting all over it, but while the game does a lot of things poorly, whether due to bad decisions on the side of the developer or simply due to the old engine, it still does a few things really well. The thing that other games with a huge budget can't seem to do even half as good is the atmosphere when it comes to a survival horror game. I mean, obviously some games do it really well, but there are some games that were made quite expensively. And for example, think of some of the later Silent Hill games. They definitely don't manage to nail the atmosphere at all, but this one does. The sheer fact that I am comparing this game, a free game made by a small independent developer in Sweden, to Silent Hill 1 and 2, which are, in my personal opinion, the best Silent Hill games, speaks volumes. Clearly the Swedish guys were influenced heavily by it because both the story, the looks, and the way the game sounds all remind me of those games. And I should have said both here. Should have said, well, never mind, you get the point. Even some of the ways the cutscenes play out seem to tickle my nostalgic memories of those games. Cry of Fear is a scary game. Once you look past the lame jump scares, you realize that this weird small game still does a good job at being a horror game. I did have the feeling of dread and impending doom almost as soon as I started playing it. On top of that, it knows how to create contrast. While most of the game is played in the dark, there are several areas which are illuminated well and give the player a sense of security and that feeling of having things under control. This is especially effective since we get to miss it once it's taken away from us again. If you play in the dark for too long and there's never any section of the game that's nice and illuminated and bright, you sort of get used to it and the darkness is just another part of the game, another gimmick. Only by being reminded of the sweet taste that light can have do we miss it once it's taken away from us again. And it's important to constantly switch things up so that this feeling is never lost, so that we're constantly thinking, can't wait for the next bright section, I'm really looking forward to having some light with me. Combine that with multiple endings based on the choices and actions you take within the game, unlockables that can be achieved through different gameplay conditions, and Easter eggs, you get a full package here. There's a lot of replayability here. You can even unlock whole new areas with levels, additional enemy types, and even bosses if you have the patience to do it. There's some special conditions that you need to fulfill within your second playthrough, but it's totally doable and it's very interesting. In other words, you get a complete game for free here, no strings attached. My first playthrough took me 9 hours because I lost 2 of them, as I mentioned a bit earlier, but still, with all of its flaws and weaknesses, I still think that this is a good game to play. It's done very well. Yeah, it has its drawbacks, but it's definitely a hidden gem. Definitely the kind of game I did not expect to end up playing. Its story is complex, the gameplay is deep, and it just knows how to be a proper scary game. If you enjoyed the first 2 Silent Hill games, as I did, you will definitely love Cry of Fear. Even though it has many issues, it's definitely something that you should give a try, and I am grateful to my friend for telling me about it. The game is free on Steam yet again, so give it a shot. It's absolutely worth it. With that being said, we've come to the end of this review. It was a long one, so I'll make this short and sweet. Thank you for watching my video. I hope to see you next time and have a great day.